I am making another take of this game. I'm making another take in an attempt to challenge myself, to try not to get too angry about this game. I'm going to try to not get too angry about the practices and all that other stuff and go off on off topic, like I did in the previous video that maybe 2 or 3 of you have seen. And for the rest of you who haven't seen that, just know that I have purged it from this channel and you will never see it. So this is the only version that you will see. So count yourself lucky on that, I guess. Hyperdimension Neptunia was an exclusive title, at least this version. This exclusive was released exclusively on the PS3. Primarily by NIS America, released by NIS America, but they have had aid from all of these guys here, from Compile Heart to IF to Idea Factory, to Gust, to Sega, Cryware. There's all these guys, right? And they have all had a hand in the creation of this game. Beautiful game, but at the same time, it can be so very aggravating. These companies that have made plenty of the smaller, lower-budgeted JRPGs that primarily tended to be released on the Sony family of consoles, that being the PS3, the PS4, the PSP, and the PS Vita. Those tended to be the golden age of all of these smaller-budgeted titles, though plenty released on the PS2 as well. These titles tend to be like the Atelier series, which are primarily Gusts. The Gusts, baby. Then there is the Record of Algarist War games. Then there's the Hyperdimension Neptunia games. There's Fairy Fencer F. There's plenty of them out there. Plenty of them. More exclusive in Japan than not. You know, these tend to have low print runs. They tend to get pretty collectible after a few years. So, you gotta be on your watch when you see these released. If you want them, you gotta get them, or you're gonna lose them, you know. I have the main 3 of Hyperdimension Neptunia. I have Mark II, and I have Victory, that released on the PS3. They remade these later on using the 3rd installment, Hyperdimension Victory's gameplay, because the gameplay style of Mark II, while better than this one, each of them had lower tier combat, so they wanted to re-release the games with Victory's combat in this version, you know. That's what they called Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth 1, Rebirth 2, and Rebirth 3. I believe all 3 of these were released on the PlayStation Vita, and they might also be available on the PS4. Do not quote me on that, for I have neither of those consoles, which is why I have the PS3 versions of these games, because I'm such a fan of them, but I don't have the other consoles to play on. So, what's got me so angry about this game, though? Why did I have to make 4 or 5 previous takes and divulging myself? Well, primarily, it was the DLC. So if you want the story in the DLC, I want to get that out of the way now, so I can just talk about the game after that. These games, made by NIS and Gust and all the other stuff, Atelier, these JRPGs tend to have a set party limit in the game, and then they have a bunch as DLC. For this one, you have 6 playable characters in the main game. Neptune, Noir, Blanc, Vert, IF, and Compa. You're going to spend the majority of the game with these 3 characters here, Neptune, IF, and Compa. The other 3 will be unlocked in the end game. Optional, but you can unlock them and play as them. These 2 are guest characters, Gust and Nisa. They are guest characters. What this means is that their sprites, their dialogue, their weapons and armor, their pretty much everything about them is in the base game, except that you cannot play as them. They will join your party as guests, so that you can get a certain perk for each character. For example, Gust can give you a discount when you're buying things from the stores. And Nisa will allow you to see shares of the other companies, so when you do side quests, you can see which share, how you'll manipulate the shares for the end game. And that's how you'll primarily collect the final 3 characters. These 3 here is through manipulating the shares and all that stuff, because some cutscenes can only happen when certain shares. So let's talk about shares next. Domino chain of story. Yes. Okay. Shares are mainly a gameplay mechanic to represent a certain religion between these console patron units, the CPUs. To basically, there's a story element to represent how much the civilians of the respective cities that these guys rule, it correlates to the percentage of their respect for that goddess. And so, the more shares a country has, the stronger the goddess is, story-wise. Because in the game, there's no change, really. It just depends on how you can recruit them. And they have a markedly less tie to the gameplay with each sequel, thankfully, because this one was the most annoying to do, because you have to repeat certain side quests to manipulate the shares in order to have a cutscene activate in order to unlock one of these characters and all that stuff. You know, there's a lot to do here that's very repetitive and annoying. Back to the DLC for a bit, though. There are certain things in here. There are a bunch of free DLCs, but that's how they trick you. They trick you, okay? All of the bonus dungeons and the bonus missions and the bonus bosses that you could fight, they're all free, right? You can download them all for free. They're about 100 kilobytes, right? So they're all there, and the challenge is post-game, ideally. For a boss, for example, one of the bosses is saying the recommended level to fight him would probably be about 500. And then one could be 800. And one could be 999, right? They recommend your level be that high. Well, what if the level cap in the base game is, say, 100? You don't need to be 100 to beat the game, the story, the main story. You could probably beat it around level 70 average for all your characters. You'll be able to beat the final boss at around level 70, even on the true ending path. So if that's all you care about, then you don't have to worry about this DLC rant that I'm about to go on. But I'm definitely going to keep it short, shorter than the previous one. But since all those DLCs are free, and all those levels are so high, and your level cap is actually 100, you cannot physically beat those things. You can't. There really is no way to do it, unless you buy the level cap razors. So, let's say for $5, you can buy a level cap release that will release the max level by about 200 levels. So if your cap was 100, it is now 300, but you have to pay $5 to unlock that. And there's about 2 or 3 of those, so about $15 total, you can raise the level cap to the max. If that starts to make you feel aggravated, you aren't alone in feeling that. I have felt no end to rage about such an idea existing. It feels arbitrary, it feels greedy, and it feels wrong to do. I think that those things shouldn't exist, and if they exist at all, they should be in the base game, in the main game. You buy it, and it's there, and you don't have to buy anything extra. That's the main thing that bothers me. Though, luckily, the weapons and items, armor pieces, and things that you can collect in those bonus dungeons can be collected without having to fight a single one of the uber-strong monsters that could beat you in one hit if you have not grinded to well over level 100. So if you just want those items, those awesome weapons and armor and stuff like that, you can collect those without having to fight anything, because luckily you have 6 items that you can use to escape from battle, and 1 item that you can use to escape from the dungeon. You can only have 6 of the escape from battle and 1 of the escape from dungeon. So once you use those items, you have to go back into the shop and buy them again. You know, but that's how that works. So I'm done with the DLC, we're done with the talk. So hey, we're at 10 minutes and we're finished with the DLC rant. I am proud of myself. I am so proud of myself because I could rant about that for so very, very long. So very long. But this time, I'm going to not do that. I'm going to rant about the DLCs in a future video, if I'm going to do that at all. I don't want to muddy it up in a discussion about this game. So now that we're done with that, let's talk about another facet of the gameplay first. Item skills. That's the big, most complicated thing that's probably going to take me the longest to explain, so I'm going to go ahead and get that out of the way now. Item skills are how you use items in this game. Item skills have a set amount of items that do different menagerie of things that are available to one character each. For example, I'm only going to give you one example. Nep Bull, that is Nepbull, is an item skill available to the Neptune character. Now, this ability item skill activates on a condition. Every single item skill has a different condition in which it can be activated. For Nepbull, the condition for this item skill to be activated is that she must be damaged, and her remaining HP must be less than half. If that condition is met, depending upon how much activation points, that's AP, how much AP that you have placed into that item skill, up to 100. Each point represents a percentage. So if you've placed 50 points into the Nepbull, if you meet the condition to have this item skill activate, you will have a 50% chance of it activating if you have only 50 points in. That's also, by contrast, if you have placed 100 points, ability points, that's AP, that's activation points, into the Nepbull skill, then when you meet the condition, that is, you are damaged and your remaining HP after that attack is under 50%, then 100% of the time, your character will use Nepbull to heal 30% HP. That sounds complicated, but it gets even worse. Every single item skill ability requires item synthesis, depending upon 1 or 4, up to 4 items here being used. If you do not have the corresponding item synthesis items required to make the item, to use the item skill, then it doesn't matter if you meet the condition and have the activation points. It will not activate if you do not have the required item synthesis items. These item synthesis are represented in 4 different colors: green, blue, red, and purple. And depending upon which item skill you need to use, you'll have a requirement to use up to X amount. You can have up to 999 maximum of these item skills. That you can not item skills, of these item synthesis items. You required to use item skills. This is getting way too complicated, and thankfully this is the only game in which you have to worry about this. So if you're playing this version and you're not playing the Rebirth version, this is the information that you have to learn in order to use item skills, right? You can purchase all of them from the shop at any time, provided you have the money to afford them, or you can collect them in battle from drops from enemies. Speaking of enemies and random encounters, this is a turn-based RPG, JRPG. Most JRPGs tend to be turn-based. And turn-based in this version is, depending upon your agility skill, either you or the enemy will go first, right? If you go first, then the enemy goes, then you go again, just depends on the turn order, right? Let's see, what else? What else can we talk about dungeon-wise and combat-wise? Luckily, thankfully, you have the skip animation button. What does that mean? Well, let's say during the enemy phase, you don't want to watch the enemy animations when they attack you. You just want to skip it to go right to your turn. In random battles, when you're grinding, this is helpful. You press down on the L2 button on your handy-dandy PS3 controller, you hold down that L2 button, and then you could skip the animations, so that you could just skip the battle, make it quick, and grind to your heart's content, or to your heart's growing ire. That's I-R-E. The definition being anchor. That's A-N-G-E-R. Let's talk about story, though. I want to talk about story. Story makes me happy. This story makes me very happy. So let's talk about that to try to get over the grumpiness of the gameplay itself. Because this is like there's a tonality here, a differential in tonality. The story and the characters make me so happy, and it was the primary reason I wanted to play this game and suffer through all of the crap that makes me so angry. So I suffered through that just to enjoy this, right? The cast is delightful. All of the main characters, all of the villains, they are all delightful. Cowboy Bebop. You should know what Cowboy Bebop is. The English dub cast for Cowboy Bebop. If you remember the character of Ed, that's Edward, that is the computer hacker girl. Her voice actress is named Melissa Fawn. Melissa Fawn voices the Neptune character in pretty much the entire franchise, and she is a delight. If you thought Edward was funny, Neptune is even funnier. If she is like if Edward met Deadpool and you combined the two. That's Edpool. Neptune is fantastic. She is a delight in the entire franchise, but she is at her best in this one. She's at her best in this game because she's not too obnoxious, but she's very funny with her jokes. She doesn't take anything seriously, but she can if she wants to. Her two main companions for 90% of the game, because you don't unlock these three until, like, the final chapter. Most of the game you're going to be spending with IF and Compa. IF and Compa are a delight, too. Everybody's a delight. Even these two who are just guest characters. All of their cutscenes are in the base game. You just have to buy their actual characters. So I could talk about that, I suppose. I don't remember if I've talked about it earlier in this video. I just can't remember. It's been 17 minutes, almost 18 minutes. But I'll re-talk about it if I haven't talked about it. And if I have, I'll just talk about it again. Whatever. Most of these characters, everything about them except for being able to play as them, is in the base game. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about not being able to play as this character or whatever. Everything about it is in the base game. There are two other characters, one being 5PB, whom you'll also meet in the game, not in cutscenes, but in a certain thing called the 5PB radio, which is basically just playing back NPCs who thank you for doing side quests, which are helping them out and stuff. So it's a nice little mechanic there, and that's the only place you'll meet 5PB in. But 5PB's cutscenes and this other character's cutscenes are all from a DLC that you have to buy. You buy those characters and you can use them and see those cutscenes in the base game, or whatever. But you're primarily going to be spending time with these two. Even though you unlock these two later, it's a lot earlier than unlocking these three, you can't play as them unless you've purchased them. So, there's that. IF is primarily a fighter. She's primarily a fighter, and Compa is primarily a support healer. So let's say this guy is a physical, this girl is a magical, right? So you got physical, magical, right? That's the same here. She's physical, Gust is magical. Physical, magical, physical, magical. Got it? Good. Neptune's both. She's all around, right? She's the best character in the game, followed by the other three CPUs, followed by IF, then Compa, then Lisa, then Gust. And then the other two, I don't know anything about them. I haven't played as them because I haven't purchased the DLC. I haven't purchased anything that's purchasable DLC-wise in this game. I've decided not to do that because it made me very grumpy. But the story, let's talk about that. We open the story with the console war. Let's introduce these characters first, whereas you're probably going to be lost. There's Neptune, Vert, Blanc, and Noir. Each of these characters are representative of the lands of Planet Neptune, Leanbox, Louis, and La Station. They are all representative of a real console. The PlayStation 3, the Nintendo Wii, the Microsoft Xbox 360. This is the only one that represents a fictional console, but it is allegedly based on a console that almost came to exist. If I've said this before, I'm sorry, I'm saying it again. Neptune represents the Sega Neptune. This was going to be Sega's console for the PS3 generation, the console war there. That was Sega's introduction, but they never made it. They never made the Neptune. Sega never made the Neptune, so it never happened, right? So, where you open in Celestia, all four of the CPUs are fighting each other. Why? You'll learn near the end of the game. I'm not going to spoil that part. They're fighting each other. These three decide to gang up on Neptune, and she loses when all three of them gang up to fight her. She falls through Celestia, which is like a realm located way up at the sky, and then you fall all the way down the ground. She falls on her head on the ground. She loses all of her memories of Celestia and the other three CPUs. And she is met by Kappa. She is a medical school nurse. She nurses her back to health and joins her party to go save the world from something that's happening. IF eventually joins them in the second dungeon, and you're stuck with all three of these characters for the whole game, and luckily they are a delight. Their banter is perfect. Their chemistry is amazing. That's the best part of this game, is the story, is the funny jokes that are made between all of these characters. The gameplay world is a satire for the game industry itself. That's why the gameplay world is actually called game industry. That's why these characters are representative for actual consoles. That's why these characters are representative of actual companies that make games. Compa is representative of Compile Heart. Where is that? Right here. IF is representative of Idea Factory. Right here. NISA is representative of NIS. Right here. Gust is representative of Gust, right here. Neptune is the representative of Sega's console, as it says, right there. Right? So there's a lot of nods to exclusive franchises for these respective companies that you can find in little side stories and cutscenes throughout the game. For example, if you're in Planet Neptune, you might find a cutscene where you meet a certain blue hedgehog. They don't exactly use the same names, because they can't, but they nod to those games. They nod to those characters, and it's it's a delight to read about them. It's just a satirical parody of all of those games. But it's very fun to recognize all of those games. If you played a bunch of games and you recognize all of those cutscenes, it makes you feel good. It makes you feel good to encounter all of that. So I recommend seeing as many cutscenes as you can. There's a percentage marker in the settings that tells you how many cutscenes you've seen. Nothing is missable. If you've missed something from the first chapter, by the final chapter of the game, you can still see it. So you can see all of these cutscenes whenever you like. In terms of combat, you can beat the game at around level 70-ish. Experience is primarily gained through, let's talk about dungeons. I've talked about item skills. I'm not going to talk about that. I've talked about how to skip battles. I'm not going to talk about that. Let's talk about the dungeon skills next. There's 3 dungeon skills, right? These 3 use the same 3 dungeon skills, so you don't have to worry about them, because you're playing primarily with Neptune, IF, and Kappa. I'm just going to talk about their dungeon skills, since it's the same 3 skills. Neptune's dungeon skill is Hammer. When you're exploring a dungeon, you see a bunch of rocks in the way. You use Neptune's skill Hammer to knock the rocks away. Simple enough. Kappa's item skill is Monster Call. When you see a certain purple glowing little icon in the dungeons, You stand in it and you press monster call, and you can call a boss monster to fight. This boss monster tends to be a complete pushover, and you can fight it to gain a lot of experience. Experience is mostly gained through fighting bosses, and that's about it. All of the random encounters barely give you any experience. You're probably not going to level up barely at all using random battles. It's going to take way too long. You will be leveling up primarily through fighting the boss dungeon monsters. Luckily, they changed this in all of the sequels so that you could level up equally, easily with random battles through bosses, all of that. It's all evened out in future installments. It's just not in this one. It's not in this one at all. IF is probably the one you're going to be using the most. Her dungeon skill is Treasure Search. When you use Treasure Search, because in every single dungeon, side quest dungeons, story dungeons, there will be a hidden treasure box, and you have to use Treasure Search when you're near it to play hot and cold until you find it. You find it, you open the treasure box, you get either a weapon, armor, or an item synthesis material. You're primarily looking for these two, and you might even find processor parts. Processor parts are primarily for the 4 CPUs here. They're transformed outfits here. They have 2 forms. They have the human form, and they have the transformed form, right? The transformed form is mainly an homage, a nod, if you will, to the magical girl genre. The magical girl genre in Japan is the counterpart to Super Sentai, Power Rangers. You got your Power Rangers for the men's side, primarily, and then you got your magical girl for the girls' side. Think Power Rangers versus Sailor Moon. That's basically the Sailor Moon archetype here. And their armor can be customized using processor parts. Now, since I was only focused on completing the game, the story, and final boss, I found that I wasn't needing to use the processor parts at all. So if you're just focused on being the story, you can ignore those. But you can collect them in the dungeons if you want to. So if that's your game, then go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. What else? I think I've talked about everything about the dungeons. I've talked about the gameplay. All that's done. It's not too much to talk about, but it's very aggravating. It's very aggravating, but there's not too much to talk about there. What else? The story. The story is fantastic. Neptune has no memories, right? So she has to go explore the world to save it from something. She doesn't know what, but she has gotten dreams from somebody telling her that she's got to do something to save the world, right? So she's going off to do that. She doesn't know why. She doesn't have any memories of who she used to be. You know who she is, because you saw that prologue part. But she doesn't know who she is, and neither do IF and Kappa. So they're going to be exploring the world, and they're going to meet the other 3 CPUs, and they're basically enemies, antagonists, for the first 2 to 3 quarters of the game. They're antagonists until they get to learn that, oh, she's got amnesia, she's not necessarily our enemy anymore, and then you help them out, right? And their personalities are very well molded in this game. You learn the most about them in this game. There's a lot of cutscenes, a lot of dialogue, and a lot of good story. It's very funny, there's a lot of comedy, but at the same time it takes itself perfectly on that balanced level between absolute absurdity and seriousness to make it a good story that you want to go through, that you want to explore through the rest of the game and suffer through the tonal shift of the bad gameplay from the excellent story. The bad gameplay, excellent story. There you go, now you can see it. So, if this is good and this is bad, this would be the gameplay, this would be the story, right? You're here for this. You're not necessarily here for the gameplay, you're here for the story, which is way up here, way up here. I don't really know the names of the characters who voice these guys, but they do an excellent job. Everybody's voice actor, every voice actress and actor in this game does an excellent job. Excellent. English dialogue, Japanese dialogue, it's both excellent. I don't know if you can switch the dialogue, the dubs, in this version, but you can in the future installments. You can switch between English and Japanese. I just play in English because it's an excellent cast. Melissa Fawn is excellent. All the other people are excellent. They are excellent, and they're funny. It's just a good self-aware game to just play casually. If you can get beyond the bad gameplay, poor gameplay, it gets better in the sequels. It gets a lot better in the sequels. By victory, it's the best it's going to get until you reach Mega Dimension, which was on the PS4, which I don't have. But it's a fine, serviceable game. As a game, I would probably give it a C. As a story, I would probably give it a B+. You know, because it's a decent, fun story. You know, it's not the best story. It's not a Last of Us. But if you don't care about that, if you love the game industry itself, and the story and the history behind games, gaming, the companies, the console wars, the Genesis versus the Super Nintendo, if you are fond of all of that type of history and lore, all of that is thrown in here in a certain very fun type of way that you will probably appreciate in different ways depending upon who plays it. But I would recommend not playing the PS3 version. Though, if you collect it and play it, more power to you. I'm not going to say don't do it. Obviously, I did it. But there is a superior version. It's called Neptunia Rebirth 1. The story is more or less the exact same, but any changes there are, you could just play this version and find the original intact version. But the Rebirth 1, I believe all 3 Rebirths are on Steam, so you can just grab them off of there. And from my knowledge, from what I know, all of the DLC party members are in the base game on the Rebirth games. And the Rebirth versions, all of the DLC party members are in the base game, so you don't have to worry about buying extra. So basically, like, that's what they did. That's what they've done. So if you're sick of DLC and all this crap that you have to do buying on the PS3 versions, play the Rebirth versions. Play the Rebirth versions. I would have played the Rebirth versions had I a Vita or a PS4, obviously, but I have the PS3, so I had to play the PS3 versions. But this is still a collectible, you know. This is the only version of this game that came out, you know. This only came out on the PS3, so you're not going to find it anywhere else. It's pretty collectible. It's not the best game, but if you're a collector, this definitely belongs in your collection. It'll look pretty good. I think I did it. I succeeded. I didn't get super angry at all. That's amazing. That is amazing to me. It is amazing to me. This is the version you're going to be watching on YouTube. The other version that 2 or 3 of you saw before, say goodbye to it. This is replacing it. Be imaginative, everybody.